Today's video is about COVID tests, and to set the stage, this Christmas I had to cross the world's longest undefended border by air, and you need to take a COVID test to go in either direction. And the tests are actually different. Going from north to south, you need a rapid antigen test, something like this one over here, and you need to take it the day before you travel. Coming back in this direction, you need a more elaborate test, some sort of a amplification test, and the one I used was an RT lamp test. Both of these tests were rather interesting because they were do-it-yourself at home kits, and this company Switch seems to have done a remarkable job at taking standard off-the-shelf kits. This is a rapid antigen one right here, and videoing you performing the test on yourself and using these non-removable serial number stickers to be able to confirm that the test that you dropped your sample on is the test that you later submit a photograph with the results. And I don't really want to talk about this test too much other than kind of poor human interface design. There are two potential lines on the test. C stands for control, and if a line appears, it means the test is functioning properly, and then T is the test result, and if a line had appeared there, it would have been a positive detection of COVID. I'm guessing that C was chosen to make these test kits well before COVID came along, and was used to just signify control. Anyway, it is the type of thing when you do the test and the line appears and it's next to C, you go, oh my gosh, I've got COVID, and of course you don't. So poor human interface design, but it's also probably a case of it works, and the key thing was rush these tests out as opposed to try and make the human interface better, and that's often the name of the game in making something successful. But the really interesting test is this one, and as I said, it is the LAMP test. What it stands for is loop mediated isothermal amplification, and the RT part is reverse transcription, which is apparently used to make the test work on RNA from the coronavirus as opposed to DNA. Now, the amplification part is what is required to go into Canada, and normally you would use a PCR test where you'd send your stuff off to a lab and get the results a day later. But the neat thing here is in this test you get a little device like this, and you have a vial full of goop, and you put the vial full of goop in there, you do your nasal swab, you put your swab in the vial, and then you push it down, and then this little package here cooks for about, I think it's half an hour or so, and what it does is it heats the goop in there up to about 60 degrees Celsius, and that's actually the isothermal part of the test. The more well-known PCR tests require multiple heat-cold cycles. This thing requires one, and that's how they were able to make this nice little package. And again, you can see what the Switch Health Company did was provide these little one-time use stickers to validate the test unit as being the one that you originally used when you submit the results. I do have some video that I took after completing the test and showing the negative result, but what's really the point of today's video is we're going to take the whole thing apart and see exactly how it works. And the first thing to point out is it uses standard AA batteries, and what I guess the first thing to do is let's put in some batteries and see if the test activates again, or if not, what sort of an error message it shows. So just hold on a sec while I get some batteries. Okay, so I've got some batteries, and I should actually point out it's been, what, 6 weeks since I actually used the test, so who knows how that will affect how this module works. But anyway, the batteries are in. Does anything light up? Yes, it's still saying the test is done, and it's also saying my result is negative. So that's kind of interesting that it is still actually doing that. One thing worth pointing out is when I did the actual test, when I was done, the batteries that they had supplied were actually quite hot, because it had obviously used a lot of power to keep the stuff in the vial at the correct temperature. So now that we know the electronics are still working, let's open it up and see what's inside. And looks like there's a little tab here, so I'm going to get a screwdriver and we'll see if we can pry that apart. Okay, I have a screwdriver or two. Let's see if that will come apart. I've never, oh, it did. That was easy. And what I was going to say was, what I would hope to see inside here, besides a nice circuit board, is some sort of an illumination LED and a microcontroller. And indeed, it looks like there's a microcontroller there and in here, and I don't know how we can get this off. Maybe those, let me just see if we can break those off. I would expect that there's some LEDs and photocell type devices or optoelectronics in here, because apparently the way these tests work is they use either turbidity of the liquid to determine the result, or either fluorescence or a color change in the dyes. And so this is the container that probably analyzes it, and I'm guessing these things here somehow guide the light from what looks like LEDs and photoreceivers over here to the chemicals that would be in the middle. And I'm guessing this combination of this and these rings is probably the heater, but I'm not sure. I figured it'd be kind of fun to see if it still works after we take it apart. And yeah, the things light up. So let's go look at the microscope and see if we can figure out what these parts might be. Okay, so I've just put the circuit board under the microscope, and you can see here's the big circular area, which I'm now pretty sure is the heater. And then if we move it over a bit, here's really the control section of the circuit board with one big IC and a few smaller helper ones, as well as some LEDs, like I'm just moving in the center here, which would be the indicator LED saying whether you're positive or not. And when I tilted the circuit board a bit in the right way, we could actually read the part number off the IC, and I'm pretty sure it's a very standard part. And there we have it. That's the part number, and what we'll do in a minute is actually look it up and see what they've used probably as the microcontroller. All right, let's zoom out again. And anyway, the other interesting thing is this big area over here. And these little things here, which I'm going to point to with a screwdriver, are almost definitely LEDs of some kind. And based on things I've heard about the lamp test, my guess is they're probably UV LEDs, but I might be wrong. They could also be blue LEDs, would be the most likely other option. And if we look at the plastic thingy over here, what seems to happen is you get the light from the LEDs coming in these plastic channels and being guided right towards the center part of the system. And if we look back at the circuit board, we'll see right in the middle of the circular bullseye is in fact another IC. And there it is. And it actually does seem to have a bit of a hint of color to it. And I'm not sure if that is some sort of a color filter, and it might just be, or whether it might be some sort of interference pattern based on layers of the chip. But my guess is it is some sort of a color filter. And if I were guessing, I would say the LEDs around the bullseye illuminate the processed chemicals, and then this chip in the center is looking for particular colors of fluorescent or otherwise colored light, and from that decides whether you are positive or not. And it looks to me like the pink stuff in the module is in fact some sort of a resistive material that can get nice and hot. I am wrong. It's not a resistive material. I'll tell you what it is. So this long, very thin piece of circuit board plating that is gold plated, it looks like, is in fact the heater itself. Most likely what happens is it is a very narrow trace and enough current is passed through it so it gets nice and hot, and then the pink donut that was on the plastic thing sits on top of it, and what that probably is in fact a thermal pad, just like you often get on processors, computer processors, between the processor and the heatsink. So this pad here serves as a way to conduct the heat to the plastic module in which all the chemistry takes place. The circular thermal paste, or the circular thermal strip, attaches the heater to these pads here in the plastic assembly that somehow heat up the goop that's probably somewhere in this maze of optical waveguides and probably pipes carrying the goop, and that's where the processing takes place. So anyway, well, that's really interesting to see what's in there. The other thing is, as you would expect with a medical device, not too clear, but there is a date code. Let me just turn it the other way so we can read it a bit better. Lucira is the company that makes the test, and then there is what looks like a date code 2020-05-22. So this thing was made in May of 2020. Interesting. All right, so I think the thing now is to go and let's look up what that integrated circuit, the one that's really the microcontroller, is, and see if we can figure out anything from that. The way to do that is we'll look it up on DigiKey, and I've actually preloaded the page. And here it is. It's a ARM Cortex microcontroller, so same sort of processor that you would find in a cell phone, but at 48 megahertz, probably not nearly as fast. And from a cost perspective, it's about $1.30 in quantities of 1,000, so less for even larger quantities. And maybe what we should do is look at the data sheet and see what we can tell from that. So again, 48 megahertz, certainly decent speed for this sort of application. Memory, it has a certain amount of flash. That would be to hold the program that's going to run it, and possibly also store the results so that you can't tamper with them and try and rerun the device again. And it has a certain amount of RAM in it. This particular one has 4 kilobytes of RAM, more than enough for what they would need to do. Very ideal operating voltages for running off a couple of AA or AAA type batteries, which would give us about 3 volts, and this thing very comfortably covers that range. It does have an onboard oscillator, which helps reduce the cost of the device and is probably more than accurate enough for what they're going to do with it. And most importantly, it also has a lot of IOs. What can we see about them here? A bunch of serial UARTs, SPI, and somewhere, oh yeah, I2C controllers. That would be great to communicate with other devices on the circuit board, probably most notably the sensor in the bullseye of the donut. And somewhere else here I also saw there was, oh yeah, a pulse width modulator output that might be used to control the heating voltage on the donut, so with a very efficient form of on-off type control to keep the temperature okay. And there's also an analog to digital converter over here that could be used to measure the temperature. There might also be some sort of, say, I2C or SPI temperature controller or controller sensor somewhere on the board. So there you have it for $1.30, quite a respectable little microcontroller that probably does more than anything one would ever need to do in an application like this. So I've just zoomed into what I think are those LEDs surrounding the donut. And the interesting thing is they have that purplish tinge, much like the center IC. And again, that might just be an interference pattern from something on the surface. Might also be a dye, and it's kind of small. I can't even get a great image from the microscope. Maybe there. So that's certainly one of those LEDs. And again, maybe the purpley color gives us some indication what color it actually is. What I've decided to do is to see if we can power up those LEDs, and to do it I've used a 5K resistor in series with a 5-volt power source. We'll try this one over here. Whoops, there was a light. Bingo. So it looks like it's a yellow LED. And we'll try these other ones. Yep. And this one. It's yellow too. So it looks like they're probably all yellow. And that would tend to point towards less likely being fluorescence and more likely just looking for some sort of the presence or absence of a particular color in the illuminated goop. I'm going to do one more test, and what I've done is I've set up this little spectroscope, and I'm going to do a video about that some other day, and I'm going to use it to look at the spectrum of the light from one of these LEDs and confirm whether it is indeed yellow. And it is of course tricky to get going like that. And yes, when I look through it, there is a very obvious yellow line, and that then does confirm that it is indeed a yellow LED. Is there anything else of interest here? Well, obviously some sort of a digital code to help follow the thing through manufacturing, and a bunch of miscellaneous other little integrated circuits and LEDs. All in all, not a bad circuit board at all. So let's figure out what this would cost. First of all, we have the MCU, and that would cost about $1, as we found out. There are 10 LEDs, 6 to illuminate the goop, and the rest as indicators. And I looked up some yellow LEDs, and in quantity they're about 25 cents a piece, so $2.50. The optical sensor in the bullseye, no idea, so I'm going to guess $1. Miscellaneous passive and semiconductors on the circuit board, we'll also say maybe $2. Finally, the injection molded case and other plastic parts. Let's be generous there and say $2.50, because there are quite a few different parts to be done. The printed circuit board is tiny in quantity, easily less than $1. And probably assembly again in quantity, maybe $2. And what does that give us? Probably about $12. Now, what are we leaving out? We're leaving out the critical item, the goop that does all the testing. And in many ways, that's probably more than anything else the intellectual property in this product, and I have no idea what the goop might cost. It might be expensive to make. It might also be something like software, where once you've figured out how to make all the components in it, it's actually cheap to make, but it's the know-how that's in it that has all the value. So we can't really estimate this, but from an electrical standpoint and from a product standpoint, $12 or so is probably what it cost them to make this. Not bad, given the test kit sells for about $150 to $200, depending on the options you get with it. And that's probably not too bad, actually, because there's a whole bunch of other things they have to do, including marketing the thing, shipping the thing, and most importantly, having the whole verification stream set up so that somebody can watch you on a cell phone while you take the test and then have officially recorded results that are acceptable to governments. So in the end, it's probably a lot like software. The actual hardware is minimal, and it's a lot of the stuff that uses that hardware that is actually the bulk of the cost. So there you have it. That's what a lamp test consists of and how much it probably cost them to make.